G'day everyone. This flip video is intended for everyone that missed the student free day on literacy this week. So what I'm going to try and achieve is just to go through some of the key messages and actions that you'll need to carry out throughout the year. The student free days have been laid out really clearly this year in that there's term 1 is for literacy, term 2 is for numeracy, term 3 and 4 are for pedagogy. And they'll address the actions and goals in our SIP. And so, yeah, the literacy one, we got off to a flying start on Tuesday. I just want to make sure that everyone's on the same page with what we need to do moving forward. So basically, all the resourcing centres around this Google site that I've got here, and I'll send you the link in the email with this video. The homepage just has some videos about literacy improvement. Then we've got a page on the student free day, which has the presentations. And then we have pages on reading and writing, which include the presentations as well as a plethora of resources to help with your intentional teaching of reading and writing. So you can go through those at your leisure. The resources section here is a lot of the background that goes into literacy improvement. So we've got the department best advice papers on teaching reading, writing and vocab, the department genre maps that are applicable to each learning area, the literacy guidebooks which give you sort of an overview of literacy improvement in schools, where they tell you exactly how to do it, theoretically. The REC documents, which include the literacy action plan and the literacy agreement. And then there's some research if you really want to dive deeper and go down the rabbit hole of literacy improvement sort of across the globe, and what academics are saying about how to get improvement in children's reading, writing and speaking, and then like experts in the field with multiple online resources. The subject specific resources section is where learning area leaders and leaders and teachers within that learning area are able to store resources, so that this website can just be a one-stop shop for everything that you need to improve the teaching of reading, writing and vocab within your subject area. So you'll be able to see these start to get populated with a lot more resources as the year goes on. With the presentations, we had a lot of different speakers, and I'm not going to try and recreate 30-minute presentations for each of the 3 presentations we did. I'm just going to go through some key elements of the slides. So Warren obviously talked about the SIP goals, which pertains to the teaching of writing and reading, and the intentional teaching of writing and reading. We talked about the PAD-R test and what it is, the different strands. We went through some example questions, which you'll be able to see when you go into the PAD-R teacher resource, which I'll get you to log on to as part of this training. In terms of PAT overview data, I was just going to see if I make that bigger, but I think that's going to be okay. We are sitting around 75% at the standard of educational achievement. So we have 1 in 4 students that aren't meeting the standard of educational achievement. And here in the red, you see the actual numbers of kids that aren't where they need to be. Another way of looking at the summary data is you can look at it across year levels from left to right, but the colors are cohort. So if you follow the yellow crew, here where I'm hovering around were our year 6s in 2019, and they were the first group that came into year 7 in high school for 2020. And you can see that there was actually like an 18% drop in SEA in students meeting that standard. Same with our year 7s in 2020 year 6s in 2020 into year 7s in 2021. There's again a 17% drop in standard there of educational achievement. So just an interesting sort of point there. We can talk about potentially what some of those reasons are for why, but we can track our PAT data across cohorts there, which can be handy for looking for trends. We can analyse by question and strand, and you'll be able to do that in the Teacher Resource Centre. And this Teacher Resource Centre is really what we want to get you to start using. Okay, so that is where you can go in by individual student, and you can see the red square there is where students have got a question wrong, and the green circle is where they got a question right. You can dive into those your class data as well, but you can also go into each question. You can see what the question was. You can see what the answer should have been down here. You can look at the question difficulty. And then you can actually go into annotated question down here, which will take you into activities at, beyond, and below the year level to be able to employ that in your classes and try and adjust some of your teaching to improve those skills. So whether it's like inferencing, which is for students to actually take their prior knowledge and what's in the reading and come to a conclusion on what that is, or if it's just retrieving directly stated information, which is so if I go back to the lowest percent correct by year level, interpreting by making inferences was the strand that kids most struggled with. Retrieving directly stated information is where it's like Tom goes to the pub, and then the question says, where did Tom go? That should be, we expect to see that less of those questions are at a lower percentage, but there still is some there where they're in the top 5. So year 8, for example, 2 of the top 5 questions are the lowest question percentage wrong were for retrieving directly stated information, which students should be smashing, provided they could read. So it's just interesting there to look at that. The next presentation was about intentional reading instruction. I'll make this one big. For this one, we looked at the biologically primary functions of children as they are brought into the world. So we went right back and looked at some cute babies. So we got Gabrielle Laxton there, Charlie Swadling, Kate's little Bubba, another Kate's little Bubba, Ruby, Jackson, Krista's little fella, little Ollie Shippy there. Thanks, Ship, for that great photo there. I'm not sure what he's eating there. Didn't get much in the mouth. Miles Southwell and little Zara. So biologically primary functions are children have a high motivation to perform them, and they can be learned with minimal or no instruction. So things like walking, crawling, sitting, lifting their head, tummy time, talking. And talking's been around for 100,000 years. So our brain's hardwired to figure that out by immersion, just by doing it. The thing about reading and writing is, which, this became really kind of clear to a group of us that did training with La Trobe Uni last year on the science of reading and language, is that they're biologically secondary functions. They're only 5,000-ish years old, and they can't just be, learnt by immersion, just by saying, just read and you'll get better. It needs to require repetition and external motivation for mastery. So the teaching of reading and writing needs to be really intentional, and there are lots of ways that we can improve on that. I went into my own lad, Tyler, who started school this year, and just how intentional the reading instruction has been. So we've got our letters, and we repeat the letters, we learn the letters over and over again. They have actions associated with them. The look of them is, how they look or are written is called graphemes, how they sound is called phonemes. This is phonics instruction. Then those letters end up making word sets, and then they go into books where they can sound out those word sets, and each book only includes the 6 letters that they're learning at a time. So it's really deliberate, it's really lockstep, and it's really intentional instruction. So I read this book out the other day. It's pretty dry. But it's interesting to see how they learn right from the start of primary school. Phonics instruction finishes around the end of year 2, and then they get to us in year 7. And I guess the point we're trying to make is that what sort of intentional reading instruction do we give them as they move through high school? This is the year 7 Waddington reading test that we did with all our year 7s. What we'd like to see the students is in the blue band, which is over 11 and a half years. It gives us an actual reading age. Now these kids are mostly 12, so we want to see them in this blue band. what we've actually got is 46% of students between 8 years of age to 10.5 years of age, which is sort of like 2 or 3 years, or 4 in some cases, lower their actual reading age than their age is, which is concerning. And so then at what point, and whose responsibility is, so we started talking about whose responsibility is it to teach reading. And obviously a lot of that falls on the English faculty, but the department is saying, and research across the globe is saying that it needs to happen across all learning areas. And there are lots of little strategies that we can put in place across learning areas to teach reading so that students can bring that actual reading age up. Some of those things are understanding that reading instruction needs to be intentional, select quality age appropriate text for reading, employ a range of BDA strategies, and give multiple opportunities to make meaning of vocabulary. So then Lauren talked about Wave 1 literacy intervention, which is basically what intervention needs to happen at classroom level. And there's a range of strategies within that. Georgia talked about BDA strategies, which is about supporting students to understand the text. Okay, so that can happen before they read it, while they're reading it, or after. And there's some examples there which are all on the site. So if you dive into that reading section, look at some of the examples and think, how could I bring one of these strategies into, or scaffolds into my teaching to do my bit for improving students' reading. Vocabulary is really important as well. And again, there's a bunch of resources on the site within the reading section that you can use to help build students' vocabulary and understanding of vocabulary within text that they're reading, or watching for that matter. This applies to like visual texts that are more and more of a part of our teaching these days. So yeah, there's a whole range of vocabulary strategies that are on that website as well. And so what we sort of asked people to do is make a commitment to action. How you explicitly teach reading in your classes, commit to a vocab, and commit to a reading comprehension strategy, and fill that out in the Google form. So I'll get you guys to do that also using the website. There's a Google form there on the reading page, which is then going to form part of people's PDP for that literacy box of what you're going to do for this year. I think that's that presentation. Got one to go. So then after assess, we sort of moved into writing across the learning areas. And so this is taking the department genre maps and mapping them back down for each learning area and looking at how can we scaffold writing and make it clear about what we expect in writing for each learning area. And it's going to look really different depending on what learning area you're teaching within. Like reading, writing is biologically secondary skill. It needs explicit teaching. We can't just expect that kids can write an essay or even write a complete sentence without some explicit instruction. Again, how that's going to look different depending on where you're teaching and how you're teaching that. This is our NAPLAN writing data from the Power BI. And the green arrow just points to a Year 7 cohort from back in 2016 that got 71% at national minimum standard. But last year we had Year 7s were at 49% and Year 9s were at 47% in the standard. So that means that 1 in 2 kids weren't meeting a very basic level of standard for writing, which is quite concerning. So there's a lot of room for improvement. Up here you've got the high bands, so they're at 9%, and there's a lot of room for improvement there. I mean, they're up on Year 7s, is up on previous years. A slight dip for Year 9s, but there is room to improve that high band writing as well. So the Department Best Advice paper on writing says that to support students, effective teachers scaffold the teaching of written secondary genres through explicit and systematic teaching in each learning area at appropriate points for the learners. That's what they want us to do. Ryan talked about backwards by design. which is, an intentional